You both came together. Does that mean you're both unemployed? Wouldn't it be better to look for jobs instead of coming here? The leader like mom, looking down on us for attending the school event together as a couple. Ms. Brown, asserting her superiority in front of the children, was acting all high and mighty. The event is about the children reading their essays about their parents' jobs. The children take turns reading their essays, and finally, it's our Christopher's turn. My dad's job is. As our son reads his essay, the classroom buzzes, and Patricia turns red and looks down. I'm Sharon Williams, a 34-year-old housewife. I recently moved to New York City with my husband, Jose, because of his job. Our son, Christopher, is now in 3rd grade. I feel sorry for him having to change schools at such a sensitive age, but he doesn't seem to mind. After unpacking, I asked Jose and Christopher to stay home, and I went to the elementary school in New York City. It was to complete Christopher's transfer procedures. When I reached the school gate, "Goodbye, teacher. See you, X." The cheerful voices of children can be heard. The teachers, greeting the children, wave with smiles. I explained the situation to one of the teachers, who guided me to the staff room. As I entered the entrance, I heard the voices of women. Turning the corner of the hallway where the staff room is, I saw parents and teachers arguing about something. They were arguing at the entrance of the staff room, causing the surrounding students and teachers to look annoyed. I'm advising for the good of this school. Why don't you teachers understand that? Do you think my advice is wrong? We understand your opinion. However, each family has their own circumstances. It's impossible for everyone to meet your standards. Then those families should move to another area. Especially you over there, you need to move for the sake of this school. What did we ever do? Everyone, calm down. Let's change places and discuss this. Excuse me. I'm here to transfer my son. Could you let me through? When I said that, the arguing parents and teachers all turned to look at me. One of the parents apologized and moved away from the entrance, and a teacher said, "Sorry for the trouble, let's change places," and invited me in. However, one parent, heavily made up and dressed flamboyantly, stared at me appraisingly. Is there something on me? Unable to bear the gaze, I asked, "What are you wearing?" Really, I'm tired of seeing so many shabby people. The parent snorted disdainfully and left. I watched her go in astonishment when the teacher spoke to me. I'm very sorry for the disturbance. How can I help you? I'm Sharon Williams. I'm here to complete my son's transfer procedures. I see. We can handle that here, please come in. Thank you. Who was that person just now? One of the parents, still visibly upset from the argument, replied to my question. That woman is Ms. Brown, the PTA president of this school. She's what you'd call a self-appointed leader. Her husband is a CEO and she's an executive, so she comes to the school flaunting her status. It's really troubling. Just earlier, she told me and my daughter that we looked poor and should move to another neighborhood. She's so full of herself just because she's wealthy. Is that so? Since you're here to register, you must have just moved in, right? Be careful with Ms. Brown. She can be a real nuisance once she sets her sights on you. Other parents and even a teacher nodded in agreement with this parent's opinion. Furthermore, from what I heard from the teachers and other parents, Ms. Brown often insults housewives, calling them unemployed. When you meet her on weekends, she shows off her expensive bags and accessories, asserting her superiority. It seems Ms. Brown is disliked by both the teachers and the parents. Sighing as I left the school, I thought about how challenging it would be to deal with the other parents. It has been a month since Christopher transferred to a school in New York City. Christopher hasn't been bullied by his classmates and goes to school happily every day. When he comes home, "I played with X today. I got praised by the teacher today." He eagerly shares his day with Jose and I. Listening to his stories, I was relieved that Christopher hadn't encountered any trouble. One night, Christopher handed us a piece of paper. It was an invitation to a class visit. "For class, we're supposed to write and read an essay about our parents' jobs. So, I'd like Dad to come too, not just Mom." Christopher looked at Jose, hesitant. Checking his schedule on his smartphone, Jose smiled and said, "It looks like I have the day off." "Christopher, I'll come to the class visit, too." "Really? Yay! I can't wait." Christopher jumped with joy. Finding him adorable, I reminded him, "Don't jump around, honey. You'll disturb the neighbors downstairs." One weekday, while Christopher was at school, Jose and I went grocery shopping at a nearby supermarket. As we parked our bikes, a taxi stopped right in front of us. Stepping out was Ms. Brown, wearing clothes far too flashy for grocery shopping. Noticing me, Ms. Brown approached with a displeased expression. I considered ignoring her and walking away, but Jose greeted her, so I had to engage. "Hey, I saw you at school, didn't I? If I'm not mistaken, it was for the transfer registration." "Hello, Ms. Brown. I'm Sharon Williams. This is my husband, Jose." "Jose. Nice to meet you." After we introduced ourselves, Ms. Brown looked us over again, then pointed to our bike. "Wait, are you guys so poor that you can't even afford a car?" "No, it's not like that." Cutting off Jose, she turned to me and said, "Must be nice being a jobless wife, living off your husband." Jose looked at me, surprised by her rudeness. I shook my head at him and said to Ms. Brown, "We'll be going now." But she stopped us. "Wait, Sharon. You just moved here, so you probably don't know this, but we have a rule to listen to the whole story. So you should listen." Feeling words like such arrogance almost slipping out, I faced Ms. Brown. Jose, looking equally displeased, stood beside me. Ms. Brown began showing off her flashy bags and accessories, looking down on us. "Everything you're wearing is cheap. I can't believe you go out in such cheap clothes. It's no wonder you can't even afford a car. Who do you think you are? You've been looking down on us since a while ago. Watch your mouth. Honestly, I can't stand poor people. Your lack of manners is appalling. Stay away from me. I don't want to catch your poverty." "It was you who approached us, Ms. Brown." "Did you say something?" "No, nothing." Even after that, Ms. Brown continued to show off her flashy bags and accessories, looking down on us. I listened, thinking inwardly how vulgar she was. Satisfied, Ms. Brown said, "Make sure to dress better for the parent-teacher conference next week. I won't be responsible if you embarrass yourself." And left. As we watched her leave, Jose sighed heavily and said, "What's with that woman? And she's raising a kid? Her husband is a CEO, and she's the PTA president. Is Christopher okay? I hope her kid isn't bullying him. From what I can see, it doesn't seem like it." Jose and I sighed and then went shopping at the supermarket. Maybe Christopher is just pretending to be cheerful so we wouldn't worry. When feeling anxious, worries never seem to go away. At Jose's suggestion, we decided to pick up Christopher from school. From what we saw at the school gate, it didn't seem like he was being bullied. He was walking towards us, chatting happily with his new friends. When he spotted us, Christopher's face lit up. "That's my mom and dad." He introduced us to his friends. After talking for a while, "See you tomorrow," he said to his friends and ran towards us. Seeing Christopher like this, Jose and I felt relieved. Before we knew it, the day of the parent-teacher conference arrived. Entering the classroom with Jose, we met Christopher's eyes, who had been looking forward to this day. He smiled and waved at us. Surrounded by the friends we saw the other day, they greeted us. "Hello, Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams." I was impressed by the good manners of the kids these days. Dressed in flashy clothes, Ms. Brown approached us and said, "You two came together. Are you both unemployed? Shouldn't you be job hunting instead of coming here?" I was shocked that she would act this way in front of the kids. Looking at the faces of the other mothers, some were looking at Ms. Brown with disdain, while others avoided eye contact. Some were whispering among themselves. It seemed to be a common sight. Jose and I didn't say anything back and stood where we could see Christopher well. I couldn't figure out which child belonged to Ms. Brown, but since she was sitting next to us, I guessed it was the one near Christopher's seat. While I was trying to identify which child it was, the bell signaling the start of the class rang. The friends around Christopher took their seats, and the children placed 2 sheets of writing paper on their desks, waiting for the teacher to arrive. As I admired how well-behaved they were. That kid's clothes look so shabby. What kind of upbringing makes someone think that ridiculous hairstyle is acceptable? Ms. Brown alone was grumbling. Worried that the children might hear her, I noticed that a boy sitting 2 seats behind Christopher was looking down in embarrassment. He seemed like a quiet boy. He was dressed in expensive clothes, but his shoulders were hunched, perhaps due to nervousness. "Straighten up. You're drawing too much attention." When Ms. Brown addressed him, the boy hunched his shoulders even more and shrank back. It seemed that this boy was Ms. Brown's child. As I was feeling a mix of emotions, the door opened and the teacher entered. With your parents sitting at the back, many of you might be feeling nervous. Let's take a deep breath together. Follow me. The teacher began deep breathing exercises to help the children relax. At first, the breathing was normal, but when the teacher held his breath without exhaling, the children burst into laughter. Ms. Brown's child, who had been tense earlier, also started laughing, along with the other children. The teacher seemed to have a good sense of humor. All right, let's proceed in order. Dorothy, you go first. The children stood up one by one and began reading their essays. For 3rd graders, the essays were impressively well written, and I was thoroughly impressed. Remembering my own elementary school essays, which were never as good, it was finally Christopher's turn. Christopher smiled at us and began reading his essay. My dad is a pilot. He flies planes all over the world. My mom used to work as a flight attendant, but now she stays home and cooks delicious meals for us. As Christopher read his essay, the classroom buzzed with excitement. Despite the teacher's efforts to quiet them. Wow! Christopher's dad is so cool! The children exclaimed. Indeed, just as Christopher wrote, Jose was an international pilot, and I used to be a flight attendant. Last month, we moved from Barcelona to New York. I can only speak Spanish. But Dad and Mom can speak many languages. So they can make the passengers on the plane smile. Can you speak other languages? Christopher's dad and mom, say something. Feeling a bit flustered. Could you say hello in different languages? The teacher intervened. Jose and I greeted in Spanish, French, German, Korean, and Chinese, receiving applause from the children, the teacher, and the parents. Dad stays fit by riding a bike instead of driving a car. Mom rides with him. Thanks to that, Dad and Mom never catch colds and are really strong. Glancing at Ms. Brown, I noticed her face had turned red, and she was looking down. Last week, it seems she felt ashamed for mocking us when we were riding our bikes. Dad flies a plane, taking clients to foreign countries. Mom stays home, cooking meals and cleaning the house for me and Dad, keeping everything tidy. I love Dad for flying planes and Mom for keeping our home nice and clean. After finishing his essay, Christopher sat down. The classroom erupted in applause, and Christopher gave a shy smile as he looked our way. Jose gave him a thumbs up, and when I mouthed "Great job," Christopher beamed with happiness. Next, other children read their essays, and then it was Ms. Brown's child, Liam's turn. The essay was filled with difficult words, and Liam stumbled through it several times. It was obvious that his mother had intervened in writing it. While the teacher watched over Liam, Ms. Brown quietly slipped out of the classroom. After all the children had finished reading their essays, the teacher instructed them to post their essays on the classroom wall. I left Christopher with Jose and went over to comfort Liam. I knew it was self-satisfaction, but I just couldn't help but offer my support. Liam thanked me, but his face remained downcast. Later, I heard from other moms that Ms. Brown had resigned as PTA president and stopped coming to school. Even when we saw each other in town, she wouldn't initiate any conversation. While other parents and teachers seemed relieved by her absence, I couldn't share in their joy. Not showing up at school events made me feel incredibly sorry for her child. When I asked Christopher about Liam's condition, he said Liam seemed down. Sensing my concern for Liam, Christopher invited him over to our house. Apparently, they found common interests and hit it off. As they spent more time together, Liam gradually regained his smile. Christopher was thrilled to have made a best friend. Christopher is eagerly counting down the days until the weekend, when they're set to play at a nearby park. Jose has been visiting the school during breaks from work, giving special lectures about his job at the airport and as a pilot. Since Jose has held several classes at Christopher's school, Christopher has become quite popular. I was also asked to give lessons at the school, teaching Spanish. I'm grateful for having obtained my teaching license during my student days. The three of us are living happily and joyfully in New York every day. Looking even dumber than usual. Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today? I had been looking forward to this family trip amidst all the harassment. I had driven for hours, thinking staying in a famous hotel would be worth it. But when we arrived, there were only reservations for my in-laws and husband, not for me. My mother-in-law coldly told me I was no longer needed and should leave. There I was, left alone in the grand lobby, feeling utterly miserable. My name is Rala. An only child, I lost my father in an accident when I was young and was raised by my mother single-handedly. Now 31, I am married and live away from home. I met my husband, Jack, who is the same age as me, at work, and we got married. Back when we were dating, I admired Jack for having strong opinions. I found his decisiveness reassuring. However, after we got married, this very trait began to be a source of my suffering. Growing up, it was just my mother and me, helping each other out. This upbringing made me, if anything, a person who's good at listening and accommodating others. I tend to avoid inconveniencing others or causing conflicts, almost subconsciously. Knowing my nature, Jack, after our marriage, began making decisions on his own, even those important to me. Take work, for instance. While dating, he supported my career, but after marriage, he suddenly demanded I quit. When I didn't agree, he went around telling my in-laws, colleagues, and even my boss that I was quitting. At work, they asked, "Congrats on your marriage, "You're leaving at the end of the month, right?" And at home, it was, "Quit already." So, I tearfully gave up my job. Furthermore, one day Jack suddenly decided we were going to move in with his parents. He announced this out of the blue, saying we had to vacate our current apartment this month and start packing immediately. Naturally, I was dissatisfied with Jack's impulsive decisions, but my fear of confrontation prevented me from protesting strongly. Just being newly married, I felt my self-esteem erode every time Jack said, "I made the decision because you didn't." After moving in, even my in-laws began to oppress me. I found myself living in a world full of adversaries, following their orders like a puppet. My compliance led to increasingly worse treatment, and the harassment at my in-laws' house quickly escalated. I couldn't stand such a life and, within a few months of moving in, told Jack I wanted a divorce and to return to my parents. Jack shook his head and mocked me. "Do you realize how hard it is to raise a child alone? Your mom gave up her time and love to raise you, and now you want to come back so soon after getting married. Imagine her despair." "Well, if you don't care about her suffering, I won't stop you." He left, mocking my inability to respond, ending the conversation. Alone, I pondered Jack's words. In fact, my mother recently started dating someone, considering marriage. Now that I was married, she could finally focus on her own happiness. I couldn't disturb that. Telling myself it would be fine as long as I endured, I put up with the treatment at my in-laws for about a year. Then one day, Tom suggested we go on a family trip. This was my first trip since getting married, but considering how I've been treated so far, I expected to be used for chores like carrying luggage and souvenirs. However, the thought of eating a meal prepared by someone else made me a bit excited. At my in-laws, I was always left behind to look after the house while the three of them dined out. And maybe I could enjoy a long, warm bath at the hotel. As I listened to the three of them excitedly discussing which hotel to choose, I did my chores with a small glimmer of hope in my heart. On the day of the trip, I was naturally assigned to be the driver. It was fine by itself, but Jack and Tom, despite having licenses, didn't offer to take turns, leaving me to drive the long journey alone. Our breaks on the way were rushed to fit their schedule, and by the time we arrived at the hotel, I was exhausted, barely managing to pull Mary's large suitcase inside. The hotel, being a luxurious one, shone with its beautiful interior and soft lighting. I took a deep breath, soothed by the elegant fragrance enveloping the lobby, looking forward to the extraordinary time I was about to spend. Having held the steering wheel for hours, my eyes were tired, and my back and legs ached considerably. I wanted to quickly get to my room and stretch out without anyone watching, but I knew these people would probably drag me out for sightseeing, disregarding my exhaustion, just using me as a porter. I sighed quietly, careful not to be noticed by Mary, who was busy taking photos of the paintings and flowers in the lobby. As I waited for Mary, who was happily snapping pictures here and there, Jack, apparently done with check-in, called her over with a gesture. Tom, standing next to Jack and proud of his hotel choice, was smiling in a way I had never seen before. I hurried over to them, pulling Mary's suitcase, thinking it would be nice if the three of them stayed in a good mood during the trip. When I reached the counter, Mary took the suitcase, saying, "That's enough." What followed next was unbelievable. "You can go back now, but be here around 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow." "Excuse me?" Confused, I stared back at Mary. Then she burst out laughing, looking even dumber than usual. "Did you really think you'd be staying with us? Didn't I tell you it was a family trip today?" As I stood there, unable to articulate my confusion, Tom and Jack, who had started walking a few steps ahead, turned back. Jack smirked nastily while Tom tilted his head mockingly and opened his mouth. Come on, a lowly woman raised by a single mother surely doesn't think she'd stay in such a luxurious hotel with us, right? You should be grateful just for being allowed into the lobby. A first-class hotel indeed has a big heart. Tom clapped his hands, clearly pleased. From the corner of my eye, I saw other guests and staff watching us, and I looked down in embarrassment. Seeing this, Jack laughed through his nose, saying it was useless to cry. We're a family of 3, so it's only natural we booked for 3, right? You're an adult. If you wanted to stay, you should have booked your own room. Though, I doubt such a famous hotel would have any vacancies now. After ridiculing me to their heart's content, they said, "We'll call you when we're ready to leave, so wait nearby and be ready to pick us up." And left for their room. Once they were out of sight, I felt my strength drain away and I slumped into a nearby chair. Even the luggage, which was only a third of Mary's, felt incredibly heavy. I sighed deeply, as if expelling all the negative emotions within me, and stood up to leave the place. A staff member who saw me getting up came over at a brisk pace and kindly offered me to rest in a sofa space tucked away in the back of the lobby. After resting for a while, I went to thank the staff member, who then relayed Tom's words to me. Apparently, Tom had said that I would pay. But, having seen our earlier interaction, the staff member hesitantly suggested that I discuss it again with the staying guests and combine it with the checkout payment as part of the hotel service. After driving alone for several hours, I finally returned home and suddenly found myself overwhelmed with tears. I cried, not knowing if it was out of sadness or frustration, for being told face to face that I wasn't part of the family and for being belittled for being raised in a single-parent household. I don't know how long I cried, but after a while, I realized something important. I was all alone now. Lonely, but free from people who would criticize my upbringing or hit me for being slow at chores. No matter what I did or didn't do, there was no one to say anything. It was a refreshing feeling. If I was forced to quit my job, I could just start a new one. If I didn't want to live with my family or husband, I could just leave. If I didn't want to trouble my mother, I could live on my own. Feeling suddenly empowered, I blocked Mary's number, refusing to run away anymore. And hastily began packing to leave the house. 3 days later, it was the day my in-laws were supposed to check out of the hotel. Even after the time they were supposed to contact me had passed, no one called my mobile phone. This was because I had blocked not only Mary but also my husband and Tom. Every now and then, I found myself glancing at my phone, but the thought of not having to hear their voices brought a sense of relief. However, I started receiving calls from an unknown number. Curious about the repeated calls, I checked and found out that the number belonged to the police station overseeing the area where the hotel was located. Wondering why the police would call me, I answered and learned that my in-laws had gotten lost in the mountains and were now under their protection. They wanted me to come and pick them up. It seems that the 3 of them, unable to contact me due to my call block, had to pay their own hotel bill. However, with no car to pick them up, they were left without a way to return home. They decided to head to the train station, but because they had indulged in various additional services during their stay, they had incurred substantial expenses. To save on taxi fare, they decided to walk to the nearest town. However, they took a shortcut and ended up getting completely lost in the mountains. Luckily, they were in a place with cell signal and were quickly rescued, but they were furious, blaming me for abandoning them, as the police officer informed me with a wry smile. Thinking they should have just made their way back on their own since they had safely descended the mountain, but lacking both money and energy, the 3 of them, unable to contact their quarrelsome wife, asked the police to intervene. I resigned myself to the fact that they were, after all, family, and went to pick them up. Upon meeting, they were furious, But I was no longer intimidated and ignored Jack's mother while thrusting divorce papers at Jack. When I indicated my intention to divorce, Jack sneered arrogantly and raised his fist, but restrained himself, realizing we were at the police station. Jack, seeing the police officers in his line of sight, must have realized he couldn't do anything foolish. He then tried to laugh it off and play down the situation. "Just kidding, are you still angry about the other day? She really holds a grudge, you know." While the officers present started persuading me to reconsider the divorce. But I was firm in my decision and declared that I would leave them there if Jack did not sign the divorce papers. Reluctantly, he signed. As we left the police station, I found myself surrounded by Jack and the others. "How dare you, as his wife? Not only did you not come to pick us up, but you also didn't pay for the hotel. Who do you think provided you with a life of food, clothing, and shelter?" Mary, fuming, demanded I put her suitcase in the car. I used to shrink under their accusations, but now I knew I didn't have to. "You just signed the divorce papers, right? So we're strangers now. I have no obligation to help you," I said firmly. Jack lunged at me in anger, but my mother intervened. When I left home, I hadn't told her why I needed to stay for one night, but she became concerned because of my many belongings and I ended up telling her everything. My mother scolded me for not speaking up sooner, cried with happiness that I had returned, and commended my endurance and courage for choosing divorce. The in-laws, surprised by my mother's presence, openly questioned why she was there. My mother boldly replied that she came to see the people who had made her daughter suffer. But Jack and his family looked down on my mother as they had on me, only laughing mockingly. They even began demanding compensation from me. "You left us in a remote hotel, knowing we'd be in trouble. The worst part is on you. We were humiliated and suffered losses, so we'll demand proper compensation. I thought you must be a woman of low character to be abandoned by your husband, but now I see it's because of your attitude. It's your mother's fault for raising you this way. You both are responsible and will pay," Mary said, directly insulting my mother. Furious at Mary for directly insulting my mother, I was about to step towards her. But my mother held me back by the shoulder and responded to Mary with a smile. "You should remember that my husband died. But I suppose someone who expects their daughter to pick them up after such behavior wouldn't remember. Sorry, I misunderstood you. My husband passed away in a traffic accident," my mother replied with a low voice I had never heard before. Startled by my mother's assertiveness and realizing they were being mocked, Jack's face turned red with anger, and he almost attacked her. Then a man rushed over to the tense scene. This man was my mother's new husband, my new father, whom she had married last month. Without paying any attention to Jack and the others, he calmly said, "Now that she's divorced, she's a stranger to you, so let's go home," and urged my mother and me to get into the car. His appearance agitated the in-laws, especially Jack, who was stunned and in disbelief. It made sense, as Jack knew my mother's new husband. He was the manager of a company that placed large orders with Jack's workplace every month. Jack, as the contact person, visited his company twice a month, so they had met several times a year. "So you were my daughter's husband," he said, clearly recognizing Jack as an enemy to his daughter. Jack, realizing he was recognized, laughed it off and started apologizing to my mother, but my father ignored him. He smiled only at my mother and me, urging us to get into the car before quickly driving away. On the way home, my father spoke to my mother. "That was unpleasant, wasn't it? He apologized to us, but not to our daughter," he said. I realized then that Jack hadn't even said sorry to me. Since then, Jack has been contacting me repeatedly, begging for reconciliation and apologizing. Apparently, my father's company had stopped doing business with Jack's company. Blamed for losing an important client and isolated at work, Jack was at risk of having to resign. He insisted it was all my fault and that I should apologize and mediate a renewal of the business relationship. But my father had never mentioned the business deal, not from the beginning to the end. He had not stopped the deal because of the issues between me and my in-laws. Jack blamed me, but he had brought this result upon himself. When Jack visited my father's company to apologize, he begged the contact person to call my father to the scene and then apologized there. Jack, under the misconception that I had influenced my father to stop the business dealings, desperately pleaded with my father's company's contact person and other employees, begging them not to end the trade. Furthermore, after returning to work, Jack repeatedly made phone calls and visits during work hours, and eventually waited for my father's return home to keep apologizing. Of course, to my father's company, it was unclear why they were being apologized to, and it was troublesome. Jack's actions became known among his superiors. Eventually, Jack was removed from his assignment by his boss for his excessive behavior. This was the result of his thinking I had caused the trade stoppage, and not considering others' inconvenience in his self-preservation. I ignored all of Jack's reconciliation attempts and chose an appropriate moment to change my mobile phone number. This allowed me to completely cut off any contact with Jack, who had persistently tried to reach me by changing his address and number. After spending some time at my parents' house, I moved into an apartment nearby to avoid disturbing my newlywed parents and started a new life. Once everything was settled, I demanded compensation through a lawyer for Jack's violent behavior and unfair treatment, right when Jack had left his job. Desiring to sever ties quickly, I demanded a lump sum payment, which led Jack to use his recently received severance pay as compensation, resulting in him leading a meager life without a job or severance money. His parents, who were always extravagant with money and had decided to live with their son in the hopes of being supported by him, had almost no savings. Thus, the three adults found themselves in a difficult situation. Later, I heard from a former colleague that the business dealings had resumed, and Jack, believing the damage was now nullified, demanded to be reinstated at his company. Jack is likely to continue living a difficult life for some time. On the other hand, having been freed from my in-laws, I started a job through my father's introduction. The new workplace is a subsidiary of the company where my father works, and a position had just become available due to someone's retirement last month. However, as a new employee, I am desperately trying to remember the names and faces of my colleagues and superiors, and there's a lot about the job that I don't understand yet. Despite the increased busyness, being treated as an individual has made my life feel very fulfilling. I hope to continue at this pace, forget about Jack and his family, and move on with my new life.